Welcome to the Power and Preservation exhibit. I'm Catherine Newsom, curator at Dumbarton House.
And I'm Sammy Hatton. I am the co-curator and collections manager here at Dumbarton House. Let's take a closer look.
Here we are in room 1 of the Power and Preservation exhibit. In this room, we give an introduction to the exhibit. We talk about early women's organizations and women's efforts in the preservation movement. We also talk about archaeology over time at Dumbarton House, as well as preservation and restoration of the museum. And finally, in this space, we talk about Mrs. Bonsall, a woman very important to the preservation, the early preservation, I should say, of Dumbarton House.
Power and Preservation is a celebration of the significant impact that women have had on the historic preservation movement in the United States. In 1853, Louisa Burke Cunningham started the first historic preservation organization in the United States, the Mount Vernon Ladies Association. In this section, you'll learn about the early organizations focused on historic preservation. The Mount Vernon Ladies Association, established in 1853, the Association for the Preservation of Virginia Antiquities, established in 1889, now known as Preservation Virginia, the Daughters of the American Revolution, established in 1890, the National Society of the Colonial Dames of America, established in 1891, the National Association of Colored Women's Clubs, established in 1896, and the Preservation Society of Charleston, established in 1920.
Here we talk about archaeology at Dumbarton House as a form of preservation. Digs and surveys in recent years have taught us some things about the early history of these grounds when some of our earliest residents and workers lived and toiled on this property. In a case under the panel are 4 objects, or pieces of objects, that were found in the ground at Dumbarton House during various digs. Though we don't know a great deal about these objects, they do offer tantalizing evidence that the history of the land around Dumbarton House is alive with stories of the past.
Built in 1799, Dumbarton House was home to many different owners before it became a museum in 1932. For over 125 years, the various owners altered the appearance of the house by adding details popular during their respective periods of occupancy, like east and west wings. Though the house was not radically or irreversibly changed, the National Society of the Colonial Dames of America, the NSCDA, nevertheless commissioned the restoration of the house after purchasing it in 1928. The first restoration was conducted to restore the house closely to its original 1799 appearance, and to transition the house to a museum. Remember, up until this point, it was a fully functional home. When Dumbarton House opened to the public as a museum in 1932, the central historic block of the house looked similar to how it would have looked to its very first residents.
In this final section of the room, we talk about Henrietta Fairfax Morris Bonsall, or Mrs. Bonsall, as she's known in the archives at Dumbarton House. Now, Mrs. Bonsall is a mysterious figure, but we know that she was very instrumental in the early restoration efforts of Dumbarton House after the NSCDA took ownership of the house. We have on display copies of letters from the Philadelphia Museum of Art, where Fisk Kimball was the director at the time. These letters indicate that Mrs. Bonsall was very active in the restoration work happening at Dumbarton House, and was working side by side with Fisk Kimball and Horace Peasley, the architects, on that early restoration project.
As we move into the second room, we'll meet our 10 featured preservationists. In this room, we feature 10 women who are currently working in the broad field of preservation today. They are contractors, specialists, activists, researchers, teachers, and scholars. While we only feature 10 women, we acknowledge that this is not the whole story of women in preservation. We would need infinite space to tell all of the stories that deserve to be told.
As we pan around this room, we'll look at some of the objects that represent the featured preservationists, including this railing featured with Isabel Thornton of Restoration Housing in Roanoke, Virginia. This railing was discovered in the wall of a circa 1890 Queen Anne style house in Roanoke. During the restoration of the house, the railing was removed, but in doing so, they realized that perhaps a sleeping porch had been part of the original design of the house.
Over here, you'll see a couple of pieces that represent Lindsay Jones of Blind Eye Restoration in Columbus, Ohio. The smaller piece is a casting mold made out of Bondo, and a pressed zinc architectural swag piece circa 1890 and 1930. It was taken off of a building in Marysville, Ohio.
Brittany Lavelle Tula in Charleston, South Carolina, started the firm BVL Historic Preservation Research. And on display in her case, we have client reports from her company that she produces for the various individuals and organizations that she works with. There are also family letters from World War II that have inspired Brittany to learn about Benny, the son of Italian immigrants, and also to explore and preserve the history of her family's Italian heritage.
And here you'll meet the first co-chairs of Latinos and Heritage Conservation, Desiree Aranda, Laura Dominguez, and Sarah Zenaida Gould. Here we have the first program from the first Latinos and Heritage Conservation gathering in Tucson, Arizona in May 2015, as well as a pin with the organization's symbol, a conch shell, which is common in Latin American history and culture.
And here, accompanying Sarah Marsham's panel, is Tiny Jane, a doll based on city planner and preservationist Jane Jacobs. Tiny Jane is the foundation of Sarah's Tiny Activist Project. She was designed in partnership with San Francisco-based illustrator Shannon May, and each doll is hand-sewn by Marsham. Part of the proceeds of her sales go towards scholarships for emerging professionals to attend historic preservation conferences.
And here we have Miranda Roberts, a museum professional who is an enrolled member of the Yarrington Paiute tribe and also Mexican American. Representing Miranda, we have this silk scarf designed by Bethany Yellowtail, who is Apsaluke and Northern Cheyenne, in collaboration with artist John Isaiah Pepion, Blackfeet, to honor the leadership of Indigenous women. The scarf depicts the women's war bonnet dance, or Shoshone war bonnet dance. This ceremony, the highest recognition of Apsaluke women, is the only time a woman is permitted to wear the sacred war bonnet. On the right, we have this birch bark basket that Miranda bought in Quebec while doing collaborative work with a First Nations community. And here we see a horsehair basket created by Rosemary Rogers DeSanto, a Northern Paiute basket weaver. It was gifted to Miranda by her grandparents after she earned her PhD in Native American Studies. The last basket is made of black ash by John Pigeon of the Pokagon Band of Potawatomi.
And here we see Ariana Macau, who started the company Zilani Glass Conservation. Ariana and her team are working conservation professionals, and as such, they need their tools on a pretty regular basis. So to represent Zilani Glass Conservation and their work, we have a panel on display featuring the tools of the trade that they work with on a regular basis. Some of these things are objects that you've seen before, like a hammer and work gloves, and others are more specialized, like a repurposed oyster shucking knife. And finally, we turn our attention to Lisa Fager, Executive Director of the Mount Zion Female Union Band Society Cemeteries, which are located just beside Dumbarton House. Though we don't have physical objects for this particular organization, we do play a video in the room representative of the collaborative partnerships that Mount Zion Cemetery engages in.
During the tour, you may have noticed a TV in the gallery space. On this TV, we feature videos from Sarah Marsom, Mount Zion Female Union Band Cemeteries, and Zulani Glass Conservation. Here are clips of them now.
Sacred space. I know you all have a space in your house, in your room, that nobody better touch. So there's usually a space where you reside, as well as a place where you might like to go, where you want to go when you want to either get away or sit by yourself or reflect. Those spaces are sacred spaces. Also, where we're going and where people have been laid to rest are also sacred spaces. Almighty Creator, all those here, for all those who are present, for all those who come with us in our hearts, we want to think of them, the benefit for them, their health, their prosperity, and the benefit to our community so it grows and prospers. This I say, Ashe, Aho, Amen. You all can say Amen. Amen.
I volunteered today to participate to help clean up the cemetery because it needs to be clean.
I think it's very important to clean up because we want to show respect, and we want to respect our ancestors and people who have came before us, and then we want other people in the future to respect us also when we pass on.
I think it's important that students remember the legacy of those that was buried here because they're our ancestors, and they really are the reason that we're here today. So without them, we wouldn't have the education that we have, the rights that we have.
Listening to one of the McKinley Tech students from I think 1961 or 1957, yeah, that was my favorite part because I got to hear what it was like before, and we got to compare how it is now and how it was before.
On McKinley, victory is our aim. Winners all will do, we'll make the call and raise our name to fame. Rock, rock, rock. We will rout them, we will something to shout. We will do or die, fight on for victory and hold Texas high. Rock, rock.
These words are as prolific and relevant today as they were in the 1920s. Although the leaves of DC might be transitioning, the roots will never change. It is up to our generation to preserve them and make sure they are known.
Please accept this bench where visitors can sit, reflect, and pay respect for the men, women, and children that have died here and that are buried here. But above all, accept today's service and our future promise to uphold their legacies.
This is wonderful. This will be a gift that will last in perpetuity, and it's something that, it's there. It's not a plant that will die. It is something that will be there. So, to the McKinley, my alma mater, my folks, my people, thank you so much.
Yay!
I am Ariana McCow. I'm the owner and principal conservator of Zilani Glass Conservation. For a long time, I said, I want to be sure that I'm involved in everything really intimately. And so I have to keep the company small. And the company was sort of like stretching all the time, saying, like, I would like to be bigger and I will function better and you'll have more projects and you'll be less stressed out if you let me be bigger. And I kept on saying, no, I want to take care of everything. And, it's almost like, raising a child. At some point, you got to just let it be what it's going to be. So yes, I'm involved in every project, but I may not install every window. I have chosen to let my company tell me what it wants to do.
Isabel Thornton of Roanoke, Virginia, is a historic preservationist who's dedicated to urban planning and affordable housing. After spending time in both New York and Southern California, Thornton returned to her hometown of Roanoke to create positive development in historic neighborhoods. Her company, Restoration Housing, has a dual mission of restoring houses and providing affordable housing to people that need it. Of her work, Isabel says, the rehab projects that our organization undertakes are tangible representations of the ideals that I have for all cities, that they may honor their historic built infrastructure and reinvest in underserved neighborhoods in a way that brings honor and dignity to its inhabitants.
As the owner and CEO of Blind Eye Restoration, Lindsay Jones has made a business out of her passion for old buildings and public art. With more than 15 years of experience in the construction industry, an MS in historic preservation, and professional roles spanning the country, she has created her dream contracting company in Ohio. Jones has been featured as an up-and-coming restoration professional in Preservation magazine, been awarded contracts for art restoration with the City of Columbus and the Columbus Art Museum, and regularly lectures and gives hands-on workshops for local homeowners, trades training programs, and high school and college level students. Her business goals include encouraging more women to work in the trades, educating more people about preservation and the inherently green aspects of maintaining historic buildings, and teaching homeowners how to work on their own homes to keep more of those historic homes out of landfills.
Lisa Fager is a self-described student of history and non-traditional preservationist. For nearly 20 years, she has worked to preserve and protect Black communities by reflecting on the past and using her voice and actions to create meaningful change. Today, Fager is the executive director of the Mount Zion Female Union Band Historic Memorial Park, Inc., or Mount Zion Female Union Band Society Cemeteries.
Ariana McCow is drawn to photography, science, math, documentation, and hands-on work, a group of interests that mesh perfectly into a profession in stained glass conservation. McCow studied stained glass fabrication in Paris, earned, as the first woman in the world to do so, a master's degree in stained glass conservation in London, and worked in such institutions as the Victoria and Albert Museum and the Metropolitan Museum of Art, all before founding her company, Zilani Glass Conservation.
Miranda Roberts, who is an enrolled member of the Yarrington Paiute tribe and Mexican American, entered the museum field a decade ago with the goal of challenging the way cultural institutions represent Indigenous communities. Through her work as a researcher, curator, and scholar, Roberts strives to recapture the beauty that colonialism attempted to tear away from Indigenous people and works to ensure that Indigenous people are properly understood. By correcting narratives, reconnecting Native peoples to museum collections, and creating spaces of healing, Roberts is preserving the cultural and ancestral heritage of Indigenous communities for future generations.
Desiree Aranda, Laura Dominguez, and Sarah Zaneta Gould were the first co-chairs of Latinos in Heritage Conservation. Since 2014, Latinos in Heritage Conservation has been working to create a national organization dedicated to honoring the diversity of the Latinx experience in the history and culture of the United States. They believe in the power of stories, culture, and historic places in building more just and vibrant communities.
Sarah Marsham's work as a heritage resource consultant is rooted in empowering the next generation of community advocates and increasing representation of lesser-known histories. With 10-plus years of experience working in the cultural resources field, Sarah specializes in education and outreach strategies, in addition to strategic planning. In 2018, Sarah was recognized by the National Trust for Historic Preservation as the recipient of the American Express Aspire Award during the 2018 National Preservation Awards and as an honoree of the inaugural 40 Under 40 People Saving Places list. The National Council on Public History recognized her projects, Crafting Her Story and Dismantle Preservation, with an honorable mention for excellence in consulting as part of the 2021 Public History Awards.
Brittany Lavelle Tula is drawn to stories, to those of buildings, of objects, of people, of communities. She created her company, BVL Historic Preservation Research, out of her passion for and interest in the stories of everyday Americans as discovered through the study of historic architecture. Headquartered in Charleston, South Carolina, Lavelle Tula works with communities, organizations, developers, architects, and private homeowners to honor the stories embedded in America's buildings and to advocate for their protection through the use and preservation of those buildings.
How did the idea for the Power and Preservation exhibit come about?
Yeah, so last week we had a program called the Women in Preservation Symposium, which was a 3-day virtual symposium hosted by the National Society of the Colonial Dames of America and the Smithsonian Institution. And apologize if you can hear hammering or voices or anything outside. We are actually an active preservation site right now while Dumbarton House is repointed. So there's construction just on the other side of the camera. But we had this symposium for women in preservation, and we started planning it originally years and years ago, back in 2015, 2016, and about a year and a half ago or so, while Sammy and I were in the planning process for this Women in Preservation exhibit, we realized it would be really beneficial to have some sort of on-site component at Dumbarton House, some sort of complementary exhibition in our space. So we started thinking about how we could complement the symposium itself with a Dumbarton House program, and eventually that thought led to some real planning, and we were thrilled then this past month to open, kind of quietly open, the Power and Preservation exhibit to coincide with the Women in Preservation Symposium, and a number of our people featured in the exhibition itself were in the symposium. So there's a lot of overlap, which is really interesting. And so we're excited this year to be thinking quite a bit about women in the preservation space, and we'll continue to do so throughout the year with the exhibition and then with programming to coincide with that. So,
how are the two galleries of the exhibition different?
So there are two rooms. The first room is about kind of the origins of the historic preservation movement. So we talk about the very earliest beginnings of the preservation movement, some of the earliest groups that were all women-led, some early preservation work that was done here at Dumbarton House, and one integral woman who we don't know a whole lot about. She's a little bit of a mystery to us ourselves. And room 2 features 10 women who are currently working in various disciplines of anything that could be construed as preservation. They live all around the country. We wanted to have kind of a national reach, kind of like the symposium itself. And as Catherine said, several of those women were featured in the symposium as speakers. But we've got people all the way in California, Ohio, Virginia, right here in DC,
Texas, all across the country. And as Sammy said, they are really working across preservation in really wide and interesting ways. We feature business owners who started preservation businesses, preservation organizations. there are researchers, there are educators who work in academia, there are advocates and community activists. So they really cover a wide spectrum of topics, of disciplines, but show, in that respect, then show how wide the preservation field is. It really is a multifaceted field with all sorts of jobs available, with all sorts of people, with all sorts of volunteer opportunities necessary to do the work. So they are a very small microcosm of the much wider preservation movement.